All of his songs move me in different ways, and whenever I need a creative push, I know that this collection will give me what I need.
Welcome to Midlife Mixtape, the podcast. I'm Nancy Davis Coe, and we're here to talk about the years between being hip and breaking one.
Where do I belong? Tell me why I'm here and what's taking this long. When can I move on?
Hi, listeners. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to give a hearty congratulations to the team over at TueNight.com. That's TueNight.com. It's a community for Gen X women, and you've probably heard me talk about them before because I love the writing, the interviews, and the resources on their site. I've done a little bit of writing for them, and I love their Facebook community. Their founder and editor-in-chief, Margaret Detweiler, was, in fact, my guest for episode 82 of the Midlife Mixtape podcast, talking about what it was like to create community for this group of Gen X women. Well, Tonight is now growing into the next step, and aside from a fabulous refresh of the TueNight.com website, they've created their own TueNight community platform for events, live and on-demand courses, topic-based groups, and live chats. It's been a long time coming for that team. It's been a lot of work on their part, so I do hope you'll go over and check out TueNight.com. That's TueNight, like Tuesday night. Tonight looks like she just came back from the spa or had very subtle work done. It's impeccable. And while we're on the topic, let me shout out a couple more websites and podcasts that aim at us ladies of a certain age. There's The Wolfer, Jumble and Flow, Dame Magazine, Girls of a Certain Age. Of course, their creator, Kim France, was also a guest on the show. She was with me on episode 70. And a new one on the list, The Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, which is a multimedia project seeking to curate and share the stories and realities of Black women and femmes over 50. That's Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause.com. Lots of new stuff for your midlife listening, so check it out. Hi there, and welcome to the Midlife Mixtape podcast. I'm Nancy Davis Coe. I'm the creator and host of this show, the Midlife Mixtape podcast. I also wrote a book. It's called The Thank You Project, Cultivating Happiness One Letter of Gratitude at a Time. Did you have a favorite member of New Edition, Menudo, or New Kids on the Block? Take your calcium supplement and relax. You're among friends here. Back when I started blogging at Midlife Mixtape a full decade ago, there was a phenomenon called guest posts. That's when you invited other writers to write an essay for your blog, probably so you could take a day off and go shop for jeggings. In my case, I had a little feature called Still in Rotation, where I invited other writers and bloggers to tell us about an album that they bought forever ago, but still listen to now. I just loved reading these stories when they came in about why certain music sunk into certain souls so deeply and how that vinyl or cassette or CD became a talisman that followed the writer forward into the Spotify and Apple Music years. So for this episode of the Midlife Mixtape podcast, I put out a call to listeners to ask you that very same question. What's an album you bought in the 20th century that you still listen to in the 21st? In the responses I received, it was clear that sometimes that album is like comfort food. Here's how one listener put it.
Hey, this is Sean J., otherwise known as Blue Note Backer. My still in rotation album is The Shins, Wincing the Night Away. The Shins has long been one of my favorite bands, and while I haven't bought any new albums or CDs in a really long time, this one is always in my CD player, especially my car. And I know that anytime I feel like I need a pickup or just something to kind of make it a little more bearable, this is the one that plays. I can listen to it at any time, any point in the album. It's full of great Shins songs. James Mercer's incredible. And this is by far my still in rotation album after 15 plus years almost since it came out. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate you sharing that story. I really love the Shins, and I have not listened to that album forever. Sometimes these albums take us all the way back in time to earlier days when we need that reminder. Like Cheryl said when she wrote in and said her album is This Mortal Coil, It'll End in Tears. She says, It's still on heavy rotation after all these years. Such a wonderful collection of songs by an amazingly talented roster of 4AD artists. 4AD was the record label that put this Mortal Coil together. Cheryl says, each song transports me back to that time in my life. We all need that little time travel music, I think. So as I was prepping the episode, I went back to reread some of the over 30 still in rotation posts that are on midlifemixtape.com, and they date back to almost when the blog started back in 2011. And I thought, geez, this is really good writing that has buried way too many layers down in the blog archives for anyone to find anymore. So I decided to reach out to a handful of those essayists and cajole them into reading their pieces for today's episode. 2011 me would have said, I'll be podcasting in 2021. Hold on for a sec. I'm just joining this new thing called Twitter. So today's episode is going to be a mix of the two. Your 2021 stories of the albums that shaped you then and now, and some older still in rotation essays that explore the wonderful connection between our music and our personal stories. Grab something to write with, because if you're anything like me, you're going to want to go back and check out all the music that gets talked about today after you listen. The two co-hosts of the wonderful parenting podcast, What Fresh Hell, both sent in responses to this question. Margaret Abel says that her album still in rotation is August and Everything After by the Counting Crows. And Margaret says, a very long story, but after a desperate and youthful romantic gesture, I found myself stranded in Vegas for 5 days in my early 20s with very little cash, and I spent the days sleeping on a lounge chair at the Circus pool and the nights walking around the Strip with my Discman and Only That CD. Such a wormhole album for me. Her partner in podcasting crime, Amy Wilson, said, when my husband and I were first dating and making road trips to our friend's parents' house down in New Jersey that had a pool, we used to listen to Bringing Down the Horse by the Wallflowers over and over again. I've recently started listening to it after happening to hear 6th Avenue Heartache at a restaurant with our kids. They were giggling at us as we belted out everywhere. Way to go, Amy and your husband, for embarrassing the kids in public. That's good parenting. Amy says, it takes me back to a time in my life that was exciting and happy and felt full of possibility. Life still is. This album, now on my Spotify rotation and not on random, reminds me of that happiness that is available to me. Both Margaret and Amy's stories exemplify the powerful way that music can take us back to those earlier days, and the way that music steadied us through our younger romantic lives, the good and bad aspects thereof. Sleeping at the circus pool might, I don't know, that could go in either category, could be good or bad. Anyway, the way the music evolves as we do came through in this beautiful essay by writer Vicky Rich from 2014 about Shawn Colvin's 1989 album, Steady On.
It was the spring of 1990, and I was a junior at Grinnell College. Melissa Etheridge had just released Brave and Crazy, and the campus lesbians were convinced she was a lady lover. The Indigo Girls had released their self-titled album, and everyone was feeling closer to fine. And Shawn Colvin had just released her first album, Steady On. It was a great time for women in music, and for women who loved women in music. And this is where I must share with you my deep, dark musical secret. I have not listened to Melissa Etheridge or the Indigo Girls in years. This is lesbian blasphemy. But Melissa Etheridge is a terrible lyricist, and the Indigo Girls' harmonies aren't as captivating as they used to be. But for me, Shawn Colvin's lyrics and voice stand the test of time, and she will always hold an honored place in my music library. But back to 1990. I had absolutely no idea I was gay. I was not struggling with my identity, was not keeping secrets. I was simply bounding through college life with the insight of a labradoodle. There were rumors and gossip that I was a lesbian, and I found the attention flattering, but it didn't lead to a single moment of introspection. My brain was busy with important things like playing guitar for hours and rugby and figuring out when Chicken Filet Day was at the cafeteria. Then one night, I went to an off-campus party at a friend's house and spent the evening drinking cheap beer and playing guitar. My friend had a friend in from out of town, and after we finished playing a song, my friend leaned in and kissed her visitor, and I tensed, a physical reaction that came with no accompanying thought. I sat staring at them for a moment, and then packed up my guitar and music, made an excuse, and bolted. When I got home, I teased apart everything I was feeling and realized that I felt jealous, that I was attracted to my friend, that I was a lesbian. And that night, I pushed play on my cassette player, curled up in bed, and listened to Steady On. I knew that my life would never be the same, and took comfort in the lyrics of that title track. This album centered me in the coming months as I came out to friends and family, as I began dating. I fell in love to this album, and when I fell asleep in a woman's arms for the first time, I did so to the haunting tune of Dead of the Night. I remember lying there, listening to her heartbeat and thinking, yes, this is right. When my junior year ended, I headed to southern Missouri to spend the summer at my mother's house. I hadn't planned to come out to her until the summer was over, but she asked, and I was honest, and our relationship fell apart. That summer, I had my tapes and my guitar. That's how I survived. And I sat in my room and taught myself to play Cry Like an Angel, finding comfort once again in the words. That was all many years ago. In those intervening years, I fell in love with my partner and had 2 kids and watched as my mother held each of them without judgment of their parents. Steady On was the soundtrack of my coming out, the good and the bad. When I listen to it now, I feel nothing but gratitude for the music and the words, for being on the other side of figuring it all out. And anytime I'm feeling a little lost, I remember that boats on the ocean find their way back again.
Sometimes the albums stayed with us because they're so damn good you can't leave them behind. In this category, Denise wrote in and said, pretty much any album recorded at Sound City in LA. That would encompass a little album called Nevermind by Nirvana, by the way, along with albums by Red Hot Chili Peppers, Fleetwood Mac, Neil Young, Rick Springfield, Tom Petty, and Rage Against the Machine. Sound City closed in 2011, by the way, but it's this legendary studio, and there's a documentary about Sound City that came out in 2013, produced and directed by Dave Grohl, that you might want to check out. It's super interesting. But when pressed, Denise said, at this moment, if I had to pick one, I think I'd put on Damn the Torpedoes by Petty because it just sounds so damn good on vinyl. And he was Denise's second concert. When the next Still in Rotation essay landed in my inbox back in 2013, I remember thinking, dang, I don't think I had any idea of the significance of this album when it came out. But when writer Lance Burson gets started on the Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique and why it's so unique, it's hard not to catch the wave.
It's cliche to remember your first, the awkwardness of how your fingers feel over every part and how they'll sound at full volume. I can't forget mine, even though it was a long time ago. The initial compact disc I ever owned is one that I keep in full, heavy, and proud rotation today, Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique. It's difficult to imagine the Beasties not being the apple of the critical eye and instead a forgettable, borderline hated one-hit wonder. In the summer of 1989, when it was announced that the white boy hip-hop trio from Brooklyn, New York would finally release their follow-up to their multi-platinum debut, Licensed to Ill, the reaction was mixed from excitement from die-hard fans to genuine animosity from many who felt they were obnoxious misogynists. I was beginning my second year at the University of Alabama. The student radio station was my Al's Diner or Peach Pit. I was there when I wasn't in class or passed out. The CD had been out for about 3 weeks. I had heard Hey Ladies on the radio, and it sounded like it would have been the best song off License to Ill. Before driving to my parents' new house in an Atlanta, Georgia suburb, I stopped by a Turtles record store, bought the cassette tape, and played it 3 times over the almost 4-hour drive to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. By the time I had arrived at my student radio station hangout, I was sure the other DJs were playing Paul's Boutique. I was wrong. One fellow Beasties fan and I talked about how awesome it was. Then he made this statement. Dude, you've got to bite the bullet, spend the extra $4 and get it on CD. It sounds amazing that way. Paul's Boutique is not only the Beastie Boys' best album, it's arguably the best hip-hop record ever recorded. Their accomplishment was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Less than a year after Paul's Boutique was released, Biz Markie got sued by Gilbert O'Sullivan for unauthorized sampling of his song Alone Again Naturally, and the rap and hip-hop business changed. Instead of goofing around in a studio with a junkie-like dependency on sampling, paying a few bucks here and there for licensing, it became an expensive contractual venture that terrified record companies. There are 106 songs sampled on Paul's Boutique, double what any other act had ever used. Contrary to myth, the Beasties did pay for the samples, but a fraction of the cost that a rap or hip-hop act would pay today. The production values of Paul's Boutique are second to none. It opens with Mike D, King Ad Rock, and MCA extolling their appreciation for all types of women, and you think this is going to be a balls-to-the-wall frat hop indulgence. Then, Shake Your Rump rumbles through the speakers and the game's changed. Paul's Boutique is a sonic masterpiece. Away from the cynical rock influence of producer Rick Rubin, the Beasties became disciples of their new stewards, the Dust Brothers. The flow of the CD is amazing. It's the perfect driving record. It's the perfect party album. It's the best CD to lift your spirits on a bad day. And it also talks about racism, judgment, cleaning up your act to survive, maturity, and being grown up. It might be the greatest album to ever play to get your shit together while dancing and rhyming. I became the second person to ever play Paul's Boutique on the air at the University of Alabama's WUAL radio station, but I'm convinced I was its biggest supporter. Talking about having more hits than Sadaharo O and being more dapper than Harry Truman became staples of my vernacular. I say dropping science like Galileo dropping the orange at my teenage daughter's cheerleading parent meetings. Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique was considered a surprise comeback artistically, but was disappointing commercially. After 3 decades, Paul's Boutique is considered a landmark in studio production, rhyming schemes, pop culture references, and hip-hop writing, and it will always be in heavy rotation with me.
Virginia wrote in to say that her Still in Rotation album comes from one of the 80s Uber icons, Madonna. She says, Madonna's debut album, even though it debuted a month after I was born, ha ha ha. Okay, settle down, Virginia. Just because I was a high school senior when Madonna, by Madonna, came out, we can still be friends. Virginia adds, it's still so good. It reminds me of when I started to learn music and lyrics. So when I hear these songs, it makes me feel full of joy, and all I want to do is belt out the songs. Speaking of 80s icons, you cannot mention Madonna without following up with Prince. And writer Anne Imig's 2013 essay about her original and current relationship to Purple Rain is, well, one of my favorites.
Even though we had some notion of Prince's Little Red Corvette, my generation's liner notes lead back to one place: Purple Rain. No 2 words evoke such a combustion of preteen angst, hormones, and nostalgia in me as those. After all, who among us doesn't know the answer to the primal call and response? Wendy, is the water warm enough? Shall we begin? Yes, Lisa. We knew that something untoward was going on. 2 ladies, bathing together. Just like we knew that darling Nicky was a sex fiend. These exciting, confusing sentiments were heightened even further by the fact that my mom accompanied my siblings and me to Purple Rain the movie, launching the movie musical sexuality discomfort level to code Itchy Pants Make It Stop. Whatever Mom thought the movie would be about, it wasn't Prince fondling, writhing with Apollonia. That's about the only scene I remember, thanks to the brain branding that mortification provides. Regardless, whatever this grind move Prince saw little Nicky perform in a hotel lobby with a magazine, well, I wanted to know about it because evidently Prince liked his ladies both pretty and talented, and I liked Prince as more than a friend. See, Prince was hot. Prince was a total babe, and not just because he could wear Esprit splatter paint overalls from the junior departments just like I could. Looking back, he probably shared a stylist with designing women, but everything went all gender bendy in the early 80s, and our hormones fell right in line. A super wavy, we'll call it a body wave of a line. Have you looked at the boys of Duran Duran lately? Remember the Newsweek cover featuring Boy George and Annie Lennox? Boy George set my heart aflutter, and Annie Lennox looked as feminine to me as the Disney princesses not yet invented. Incidentally, put a pencil wisp of a mustache on Jasmine from Aladdin and a ruffle throat tunic, and voila, Prince. Purple Rain was my first 33 RPM record purchase at Westtown Mall with my own allowance. I did not get one of the coveted purple vinyl limited editions, so I drowned my sorrows in tartan tinies and the purchase of a Purple Rain t-shirt from Spencer Gifts. I wore said t-shirt to Mrs. Selvag's 5th grade class to claim my fandom, along with my homemade I Heart Billy Idol button, written in crayon. I even choreographed and performed my own version of the bird routine in music class. I pledge allegiance to the time. Hand on heart, other hand starts at 6 and flares right on up to midnight. I spent after-school hours with that record jacket in my room, singing along and wishing I could comfort just one poet blouse sleeve's worth of Prince's angst. He only wanted to see her bathing, laughing in the purple rain. Is that too much to ask? But he never can, because rain never equals purple. I would die for you, Prince. Me. Because I heart you, for you are a QT. I don't care if we spend the night in your mansion, but actually I'd like to see a real live mansion. Take me with you. 1999 came and went along with Y2K. Prince became the insignia formerly known. Instead of dancing in our middle school gyms, you'll see my friends and I going crazy from the driver's seat of our little chrome station wagons. We know what it sounds like when children cry. That's when we turn up the doves.
My good friend Jill wrote in with her still in rotation pick, and it was Elvis Costello. Jill wrote, "Well, Elvis Costello's Punch the Clock was my absolute favorite first album. The song that returned to the top of the still in rotation pile for me is from his 1979 Armed Forces album. Last fall, in the horrible run-up to the November election, I returned to What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding and had it on repeat. The lyrics felt like a rallying cry to me, and it's the perfect song to sing at the top of your lungs in the car." Well, one of my still in rotation guest writers would no doubt agree with Jill's choice, but for writer Lisa Rosenberg, the Costello album of choice was My Aim Is True.
In the summer of 1982, I celebrated my recent high school graduation at a concert at the Santa Cruz Civic Auditorium. I was there to see Elvis Costello. 7 albums deep into his career, he was touring behind his latest release, Imperial Bedroom. I was there to hear so many of my favorite songs, and especially those from his very first album, My Aim Is True, specifically to hear my favorite song, Allison. At the concert, my hair was cut in a severe chin-length bob. I wore black and white saddle shoes that were meant to represent me as one who enjoyed iconic throwback fashion and was sort of into ska. My friend Valerie and I danced in our vintage pencil skirts. The crowd was young and rowdy and new wave. There was dancing and skanking, and someone was kicked out for smoking pot. Elvis wore a suit and a tie and his signature black-framed glasses. He was funny and clever and fiercely intelligent, an amazing musician with one of my favorite voices on the planet. After the concert, Val and I sneaked into the bar at the Holiday Inn where we heard Mr. Costello was staying. We giggled as we watched him drinking beer at the bar. When we finally got the courage to say hello, he was kind. Growing up in a Northern California coastal town, music at my high school was Blue Oyster Cult and AC/DC and more Blue Oyster Cult. New wave and punk music hadn't broken through the pot-fueled haze of weekend keg parties at the beach. Listening to Elvis Costello felt like something other, an act of defiance and freedom. It made me feel grown up. It was mine. In college, I was living in LA. I had shaved the left side of my head and was wearing the right side in braids. I was living on a futon in the family room of a friend's apartment. I borrowed a homemade cassette of My Aim Is True from my friend Barry and played it on a small battery-operated boombox in my car as I cruised Hollywood in my Toyota hatchback. I never returned Barry's tape. It followed me from car to car through the 90s and into the new millennium. The songs were my anthems, seeing me through movies and jobs, marriages and divorces, road trips, bad haircuts, and worse outfits. Elvis Costello's iconic voice and gutting lyrics sustained me. 8 years ago, my husband Jeff and I saw Elvis Costello at the Arlington Theater in Santa Barbara. He played alone on the stage with his guitar. My hair had been dyed to cover the gray. I wore a vaguely business casual ensemble with a colorful scarf to keep off the chill. I sat in my assigned seat and clapped appreciatively between songs. The crowd looked like the population of a 30-year high school class reunion. More than one of the men resembled Mr. Belvedere with a ponytail. There was polite applause and singing along, and someone got kicked out for taking a picture with his iPhone. Elvis wore a suit and a tie and his signature black-framed glasses. His temples were graying, and under his hat, a receding hairline. It was a grand performance. He played my favorite song, Allison. Over time, I finally figured some things out. It's no mistake that my husband is also funny and clever and fiercely intelligent, an amazing musician with one of my favorite voices on the planet. After that concert, Jeff and I talked and laughed on the long ride back home. When we got to the house, I tiptoed into the room of our little boy, who, had he been born a girl, might have been named Allison.
I loved this memory that Pam shared on Facebook of one of my favorite early albums, In Excess's Shaboo Shubaa. Pam wrote, "I still listen to this album a lot. I first heard it in the fall of 1984 when I was falling in love with my college boyfriend, Andy. He told me that To Look at You reminded him of me because I was, as the lyrics say, a different kind of girl who knows the feelings but never the words. He and I went to see INXS at the Dane County Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was an awesome show. R.I.P. Michael Hutchence. Let's all pour one out for Michael. Pam says, Andy and I dated about 5 years, but didn't end up together. We're both happily married with kids and are still friends, even though I now live in Chicago and he lives in Marquette, Michigan. Happy ending. Happy ending on that. I knew I was going to invite the writer of this next essay to record her Still in Rotation pick, primarily because it gave me an excuse to catch up with her after a very long pandemic. So after an hour of chit-chat in which I learned that she's done a fascinating career shift, and I'm going to invite her onto the show to share it with you someday soon, I finally remembered to press record so that Taya Dunn Johnson could tell us all about her Donny Hathaway devotion.
Entering my childhood home in Hempstead, New York, one was almost certain to hear music in the background. My parents were both music lovers. My dad played the drums for many years in the local band, and two of my uncles were DJs. I can recall day-long trips from our home on Long Island into Brooklyn and the Bronx to visit old record stores that my father and uncles loved. The smell of thousands of vinyl records in a small space was intoxicating. Being surrounded by music was the most natural thing in the world to me, and my love for it developed early. My parents got great joy in watching me perform my own dance routines to songs by the Stylistics and the Commodores, and I'd be shocked if any other 5-year-old knew all the lyrics and cadences of songs like Baby Work Out by Jackie Wilson. Family and music were connected in such a way that the Christmas holiday season became that much more magical to me. Each person has that song, you know, the one that puts you deep into the holiday spirit from the very first note you hear. I don't remember the first time I heard This Christmas by Donny Hathaway, but I do know that by the age of 5, I had all the lyrics memorized, and it was that song for me. My parents had a small collection of Christmas songs from the Temptations and a few other soul artists. Prior to hearing Donny Hathaway's contribution, so many Christmas songs simply didn't reflect the amount of soul and love that my favorite R&B songs contained. This Christmas had it all. Deeply melodic voice, catchy repetitive chorus, tambourines, and a grooving bass line. As soon as the song came on, you just had to dance, smile, and say, oh yeah, this is Christmas. I remained a lover of music my entire life, and it's probably no coincidence that my high school boyfriend turned husband played percussion like my father and had my same affinity for good music. During my first year of college, music helped soothe the stress of being an only child away from my parents and boyfriend for an extended length of time. Late one night in early December while studying for finals, I found myself needing a real boost, a taste of home and family to push me through to the finish line. I was surrounded by friends and dorm mates, but everyone was struggling and none of us were having any luck with motivating one another. Donnie's voice popped into my head and I knew what I needed to do. I ran into my room and searched desperately for my cassette tape of holiday jams that I had recorded from the radio the previous Christmas. I tossed it in the tape deck and instantly the odd 3-count drum beat filled our suite with energy. My black friends jumped up and started singing and swaying to the beat. My white friends looked intrigued and I knew it was the first time they had ever heard the song. Within a few seconds, Donnie grabbed the newly exposed and made them dance too. When the song ended, the questions began. Who was that? What's that song called? I've never heard that before. Can I tape it from you? And then the one that stopped me cold. What else does he sing? What else does he sing? I simply didn't know. I had a cassette entitled A Donny Hathaway Collection, but I was embarrassed to admit I'd never listened to any other song on it. I felt like I had just failed a major musical test and imagined the disappointment on the faces of my father and uncles. With a mere 8 hours until an astronomy final for which I was ill prepared, I layered myself with winter clothes and made the short walk from my dorm to one of the 24-hour computer labs on campus. It was full of stressed out students attempting to absorb the final nuggets before their exams, and those painfully squeezing out just enough words to hit the page count for required essays. Not an empty computer to be found. Damn! At that moment, my need to know more about him was so great that I would not be deterred. I went back into the cold, heading for another computer lab that was farther away, and then it clicked. I was on the grounds of the University of Virginia, and we had an amazing music library. I hustled over to the Peabody Library and could not believe I had not made this magical place a second home. I dove in and found myself falling down the rabbit hole. Microfiche articles, reel-to-reels, album recordings, digital photo images, with so much information on Donny Hathaway that I never expected to see the end of it. I was excited, intrigued, and saddened by all that I had read and heard. Never had I heard and connected with an artist in the way that I connected with Donny Hathaway. The beautiful timbre of his voice was like that of a warm flannel blanket on a bone-chilling winter night. It warmed my heart and soul like that of a long-lost friend and lover. The loving quality of his voice was wrapped in equal layers of pain and despair. I couldn't ignore the pain. The raw emotion that was woven through each song caused my tears to flow without warning. That night, I fell in love with Donny Hathaway. I would go on to read about his musical beginnings, his love and marriage to his college sweetheart, their 2 daughters, his friendship and musical duets with Roberta Flack, and eventually his death. Reading the hazy details surrounding his death pained me, as if I had known and loved him during the course of his life. The official narrative is that he completed suicide, but I'm a stubborn believer that his fall from the 15th floor of the Essex Hotel in New York City was a tragic accident. Although he had suffered from depression in the past, family and friends, specifically Roberta Flack, who was with him that very day recording new music, report that he was in great spirits that day and very optimistic about the career developments on the horizon. He was known to remove the screen from hotel windows and sit in them in order to get fresh air and hear the pure sound of his own voice. From that night in December 1993 until today, Donny Hathaway's music has occupied a prominent place in the soundtrack of my life. The compilation, A Donny Hathaway Collection, is my go-to recording when I need a little dose of Donny. His catalog is much more extensive than just this collection, but it's the one that I keep in heavy rotation. He speaks of life, love, heartache, passion, pain, heartbreak, joy, happiness, and regret. If one were to just hear This Christmas, they might take him to be a joyful one-hit wonder, but he is so much more than that. He is an artist that wrote to release his soul, and he unselfishly shared it with the rest of us. Many know of Donny only as the male singer on the popular duets that he and Roberta Flack sang together, especially The Closer I Get to You and Where's the Love. While I can appreciate those, they are but one small facet of the gifts that Donny left with us. A few of my favorites that stay on repeat are For All We Know, which speaks to a pair of lovers who have a moment in which they share their love with the idea they may never have another. You Were Meant for Me, which speaks to him loving a woman and vowing not to let anything tarnish their love. And one of his most special recordings, Someday We'll All Be Free, which caused him to cry in the recording studio upon its completion. My painful favorite is Giving Up. That one always pushes me to the verge of tears. Donny's talent was passed to his daughter, Layla Hathaway. I followed her career closely, and I hope to one day be able to tell her just what her father's music does to my heart and soul. All of his songs move me in different ways, and whenever I need a creative push, I know that this collection will give me what I need. In late 2008, I was 39 weeks pregnant with our first child, and it became evident that I might not begin labor on my own. My obstetrician decided my husband and I needed to schedule my delivery, so we sat together to look at the calendar for January 2009. She offered me a range of dates between January 7th and January 14th. Without a moment of hesitation, I selected January 13th, 2009, 30 years to the day that Donny Hathaway's musical genius left this planet. I often wonder what other treasures Donny would have given us had he not passed away at the young age of 33. Yet I am forever grateful and thankful that he shared as much as he did.
One last write-in from a listener, and that's Arnell talking about Song to a Seagull by Joni Mitchell. Arnell writes, I played it a lot in my teens. It comes into rotation when I'm sad or moody. It lets me play with my emotions, and then it makes me happy. After that, I continue to play it simply because her voice is so pure, the lyrics so vivid, and the melodies so lovely. I've been listening to it on and off for a couple of months now. I just finished, by the way, reading Brandi Carlile's memoir called Broken Horses, and her devotion to Joni Mitchell is just lovely. And there's some great stories that she shares about Joni kind of taking notice of her and inviting her over to jam. And Brandy's reaction to it is, I think, all of our reaction to it. Like, she just does not think she's worthy. And it's really pretty cute. So I love that book, Broken Horses. I recommend it if you're a Brandy fan. One final still in rotation from the archives comes from writer Lori White, writing about the 1992 album Black Eyed Man by the Cowboy Junkies.
I wish I could remember the day I first discovered Cowboy Junkies' Black Eyed Man, because it just seems right to remember when my most important and enduring relationships began. Taking a kinder view of my mental capacity for a change, I think it's just one of those things that feels like it's always been there, so maybe the particulars aren't that important. I listened to the album as close to how I used to as I could, minus a couple of vices and a newly broken heart, to try and remember. I crashed on my couch and turned it on. On Spotify, not a scratched CD I scrounged off of my car floor. I cannot tell you how many copies of this I loved and lost, and let it play. No cigarettes now, no extra long twin bed. Why are these beds extra long? In a drafty Ohio grad school house. No Ohio at all. No, none of that. Tonight, it's just Margot Timmons singing her way into the corners of my living room and through some sort of Southern Gothic alt-folk landscape that no one I know of outside of real country music can create like her and her brother Michael, who plays guitar and writes the lyrics. I used to like to think of when they first realized it worked so perfectly and what it's like to be that creatively tied to your brother in a way that's in any way sustainable, on the road even, for decades. I followed them obsessively for a few years on their usual circuit of mostly restored theaters with columns and curtains and small listening room type spots. Michael sits to play guitar. Margot always has a stool for the occasional sit and chat, plus tea and the eternal bouquet of flowers sent by a fan. They may as well be performing in different rooms. Their approach to the experience is so different, but she still looks at him and back at the band, another brother is the drummer, with what I identify as affection, so that's good. When I found them, people were all about their remake of Velvet Underground's Sweet Jane on 1988's The Trinity Sessions. They are into homage via cover song and guest appearance, and this song loved them back. I liked it a lot and had a long communion with Misguided Angel in particular, probably because of some over-identification at the time with the protagonist, but it wasn't until Black Eyed Man that I bit and hung on. It kicks off with Southern Rain, a gorgeously made and sung song with a groovy guitar hook that sets the mood you need to get through this. It still gets me every time. It's all mini-stories like this, of crimes of passion, old loves waiting on trains, a woman fleeing pain to ride her horse every second Sunday. The title track details a black-eyed man taking the fall for poisoning a well because he happened to piss his girlfriend off, which in Michael Timmons' mind you apparently ought not to do. The last line of the last verse, "It ain't the water that's not right around here," is still one of my favorite lyrics. And so it continues for almost 45 minutes. Trial for what? Axe for why? Murder tonight in the trailer park? Who? Don't know. Something strange is generally afoot, and love or killing or both, Margot rolls through it. It's best not to ask too many questions like the people in the songs. Once you've heard her voice, speaking or singing, you won't anyway. Candy, the weightiest kind. Magic in your face and your ears. I met her once, and she was just as I'd have wanted her to be. I don't like to meet performers I love usually. Ruins the illusion, and I need to keep a few of those. In this case, I'm glad I made an exception because I have a picture and it is happy. That was a good night. It's been easy to take this album with me. It doesn't need to recapture anything it or I was when I had it on repeat during a long heartbreaker of a first year away from home, in the shambles of a first love, smoking too much and crying too much, and I don't even know how I'd have survived it without music, you know? I remember sitting in venues by myself, watching them bring it to life on stage, taking me into and out of myself. Certain music is one of the only things that can change my brain, 0 to 60 in one track. The last song is a cover of Townes Van Zant's To Live Is to Fly. This one is different. The stories are over and you've got a mission now, to move on. It's hope that has gone on to so many of my mixtapes and playlists ever since. It means different things all the time, but it always works. I didn't believe that it didn't pay too much to think on the things I left behind when I heard it the first time, but I wanted to, so much. It's good to catch up with Margot now, to hear her say it again, to keep pressing play, to see what stuck.
It's good to catch up with Margot now, to hear her say it again, to keep pressing play, to see what stuck. That's the line for me right there. Keep pressing play and see what sticks. So I was thinking about how I would answer this question, kind of looking at it from a 2021 perspective. What's the album that's still in rotation? And for me, during the pandemic, it's been Peter Gabriel's So. And I was thinking about it, and I realized I've written about that before, not for midlifemixtape.com, but as a guest post on a different blog. And so I'm going to share that with you. This got published on therumpus.net back in 2012. It's not so much about why it sticks with me now, but rather why I gravitated toward it in the first place. Whenever I felt the waves of homesickness approaching during my semester abroad in Vienna back in 1987, I knew what I had to do. Button up the gray, scratchy Tyrolean jacket I'd bought at a flea market, tuck my yellow cassette-playing Walkman into its breast pocket, and press play on Peter Gabriel's So. I'd never been a fan of Genesis growing up. On our family radio dial, my sister held down country, I ruled over new wave, and my brother's territory was all things rock. We were gleefully opposed to each other's tastes out of principle, and liking anything by Genesis or Gabriel would have felt disloyal to the cult, Echo and the Bunnymen, and New Order. But one high school summer, during which I worked as a camp counselor, far from a radio signal, a Peter Gabriel mixtape lettered in my brother's handwriting somehow ended up in my canvas duffel bag. I played Salisbury Hill, hit rewind, played it again and again and again, stopping only to listen to Biko and San Jacinto a few million times each. So by the time So came out in '86, I was one of the first people in line at the college record store to buy the cassette. As a person who had decided at 14 she would have a career in international business, I was as surprised as anyone to realize during my junior year of college that I'd never been abroad. My German was passable, and Vienna seemed more exotic than Munich. So I found a program there and moved academic heaven and earth to make it happen for the spring semester. My advisor let me know I'd have to double up on required courses before and afterwards, but while I was in Vienna, I could coast with electives like Viennese opera and Austrian artists of the Viennese secession. Predictably, the first 3 weeks living in Europe were thrilling, a melange of new challenges and strange customs and easy classes, and it being Vienna, pastries. But reality arrived in a rush of record-breaking winter storms, short-tempered sales clerks, expensive groceries, and an accent that scoffed at my textbook German. That my landlady rented out the single bathroom in our flat to Turkish guest workers who needed a quick bath only added to my sense of isolation. The only thing that could put me back right was a long walk in the cold along the Danube with Peter Gabriel singing in my ear. The first bars of Red Rain always coincided with my hasty departure from the apartment, which was on the top floor of an ancient building with no elevator. The wide, unheated concrete staircase was always dark, and you had to hit a timer light on each level to see your way down. I'd smack the light switch and pound down the stairs in time to the driving beat of the song, cursing the stupidity of the Viennese for not installing proper lights, by which I meant American lights that stayed on. Through the prism of time, I can now appreciate this energy-conserving lighting system, but at the time, this place is so quiet, sensing that storm, I was the storm, baby. I was the mother effing Red Rain. I'd plunge into the cold and walk a few blocks to the icy Danube Canal, and by the time I descended to the walkway that ran alongside it, Sledgehammer would be playing. There's not a better song to get the blood pumping, warming up the digits, and exposed facial skin that the Viennese wind was trying furiously to frost. My gate to Sledgehammer was the ultimate defiance. I would not let Vienna ruin my study abroad experience. And then ethereal Kate Bush would chime in with Peter Gabriel to chide me gently. Don't give up, she'd sing. You're not beaten yet. It was usually at this point, 15 minutes or so into my heart-pounding walk, that my shoulders would lower and my jaw unclench. Not quite ready to lay down my bag of self-pity, maybe. I would at least start looking around me instead of at my pounding feet. As that voice again in Mercy Street flowed past, I began to notice the details. The cute punk couple walking their dachshund in its little green Tyrolean coat. The apartment building with Viennese secessionist embellishments that reminded me of something our art professor had told us about Otto Wagner. Graffiti written on a bench in German, whose irony I actually understood. I'd execute a pivot step here and start heading back for home. You cannot listen to Big Time without an inward smile at the blowhard narrator who's praying to a big god as he kneels in his big church. It's a song that reminded me not to take myself too seriously. So studying abroad isn't perfect. So the landlady offered you a tray of home-baked cookies that you devoured and only realized in watching her recreate the recipe later that she formed each ball of batter into the palm of her fresh-licked hand. So you blew your entire food budget for the month on a pair of pony skin leopard combat boots. If nothing else, I was collecting good stories. I'd be nearing the steps to climb back up to my street when that 100-pound gorilla of a song, In Your Eyes, came on. As any woman who was a teenager during the 80s will tell you, the sight of Lloyd Dobler holding his boombox aloft for Diane Court to hear this song pouring out ruined us as romantic partners forever. Unless a guy comes up with a line as stunning as, "In your eyes, I see the doorway of 1,000 churches," which one might reasonably argue is an unattainable task, he will always be a little bit of a disappointment. Yeah, so maybe I'd gained the Viennese 20 thanks to the Wurst stand and the gelato shop that I passed on my way to school, not to mention the Herzlichen Glückwunsch cookies that conveyed best wishes and about 3,000 calories each. But up here in my eyes, I'm a freaking cathedral man with stained glass and kneeling benches of emotion. Right before I left for Vienna, I ran into a classmate of mine for whom I pined at a frat party that was coming apart at the seams at 3 a.m. So was on the stereo, and when In Your Eyes came on, he silently put his hand on the small of my back and pushed me to the center of the empty dance floor, its perimeter marked by drunken students flopped on couches. Maybe this guy saw my basilicas. We swayed into one another through the very last note, and it became our song, even if I left for Vienna before there was time for an hour. So even today, when I hear In Your Eyes, I send a silent Herzlichen Glückwunsch out to my old classmate and to Peter Gabriel to give me a reason to keep going. So I've been trying to figure out why this album is suddenly so high in my consciousness again in 2021, and I think the common thread is anger walking. I have spent so much time walking in the past year just because it's something to do. I recommend it. Give it a try. Let me know what you thought of today's episode. Maybe you have a still in rotation that you want to share after listening today. If you do, drop me a line at dj@midlifemixtape.com or send me a message via Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at midlifemixtape. I'm still scheduling virtual events around the topic of gratitude letters and my book, The Thank You Project, for school groups, for community organizations, libraries, workplaces. If you've got a group of people, I'd love to tell them how gratitude letters work. If it sounds like something you're interested in learning more about, or if you know of a conference or organization interested in learning more, please let me know at dj@midlifemixtape.com. And if I book an event thanks to you, I would love to send you a signed copy of The Thank You Project if you want it. I don't have to send you a book if you don't want it, but I really do appreciate the support. And remember, Mother's Day is coming up May 9th. Have you written your mom or aunt or daughter or sister or fellow pod mom a thank you letter yet? Write it now, hand it over with a copy of the book, and bam, time for mimosas. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
I don't wanna be this, don't wanna be that, don't wanna give up, I wanna give back. I wanna be free by whatever means, whatever you want from me, I wanna be. Don't wanna be this, don't wanna be that, don't wanna give up, I wanna give back. I wanna be free by whatever means, whatever you want from me, I wanna be. I wanna be free by whatever